In the first 8 episodes of Faking Michael, we've told and retold the story of the Casio tracks from several different angles. We've heard the story through the eyes of Michael's family and fans. We've heard insights from several of Michael's former collaborators. We've looked at things from the perspective of Sony Music and the estate. And we've given James Port, Eddie Casio, and Jason Malachi a voice, telling their side of the story through their previous interviews with others, through the testimony of those who know them, and through the information we've uncovered within the paper trail they left behind. In the next 3 episodes of Faking Michael, we'll take a more detailed look at that paper trail, while introducing explosive new evidence from a series of experts and insiders, including a leading forensic musicologist.
Authenticating a vocal with unknown provenance is actually quite a rare thing to do.
And a veteran forensic audiologist.
So I proceeded to analyze these from the standpoint of a skeptical scientist.
We'll also hear from people who worked with Casio and Port.
You kind of start creating rationalizations to keep the integrity of Michael's performance intact in your mind.
People who worked on the Casio tracks.
I have no proof. I'm not trying to prove it.
And members of the Faking Michael research team.
You don't hear a single Michael Jackson vocal. No Michael Jackson vocals anywhere.
It was just nail after nail after nail in the coffin. And it's like, holy crap, this is a masterminded fraud.
It's a big case. It's equivalent to someone faking, say, Jackson Pollock or faking Rembrandts, trying to sell them as legitimate paintings or originals. It would be in the same category as that.
That's the voice of Robert Whitman, a former FBI agent and the founder of the FBI's art crime team. Whitman has made a career out of investigating and solving art crimes. As an expert witness, Whitman has testified in several high-profile fraud cases and is personally responsible for recovering more than $300 million worth of stolen art. While researching for this podcast, I stumbled across Whitman in a documentary about a totally unrelated case of art forgery and thought, I could probably use his advice. And so I reached out to him to get his thoughts on the investigation my research team and I have conducted regarding the authenticity of the Casio tracks.
Anyone that comes to me that talks about any type of forgery, whether it's art, contracts, music, or anything else, the first thing we have to do is the same in every case. Look at the actual allegation itself and determine whether or not the pieces that we're looking at are forgeries to begin with.
Art forgery is committed by creating an artwork in the style of a famous artist, falsely attributing that artwork to that artist, and then selling that artwork as an original by that artist. The victim in a case of art forgery is the person who bought the forged art. In the case of the Casio tracks, we have a collection of 12 songs which are alleged to have been created in the style of Michael Jackson, falsely attributed to Jackson, and sold to his estate and Sony Music as original Jackson recordings, making the estate and Sony victims of fraud if the songs are indeed forgeries. The alleged forgers are James Port and Eddie Casio, the original producers of the Casio tracks before they were sold to Sony and the estate. Also alleged to have been involved is Jason Malachi, the deputy sheriff from Montgomery County, believed by many to have been hired by Casio and Port to be the vocalist on the tracks.
In this case, you're not going to convict anybody except the producers. The producers are the ones who created the crime. And what you have to show is that they knowingly contacted somebody and sold them a bill of goods that was fake and benefited by it, and that they conspired to do it. And in fact, they did, because they got this guy from Montgomery County and brought him in and had him do the fake songs, and you convict the 2 producers. Also, in a case like this, because you have more than one person, it would be a conspiracy to commit those crimes. Conspiracy is considered a much higher level of crime. But the point is that it's a deterrent to stop other people from doing the same thing.
When discussing how the FBI approaches cases like this one, Whitman explained that there are three main areas that the investigation should cover: provenance, connoisseurship, and forensics. And so when presenting the evidence in the next 3 episodes, we'll cover all 3 of those areas, starting with provenance.
So one of the things you'll look at in a fraud case is provenance. In a hard case, it would be where the piece was created, documentation on where it was shown and exhibited throughout the years. Same thing for a piece of music. It would be where it was created, who was on scene at the time, who mixed it, how it was created, and where it was put together. All of that would be part of the provenance of a piece of art or a piece of music.
By definition, provenance is the place of origin or earliest known history of something. And so the first thing we'll do when discussing the provenance of the Casio tracks is recap and expand on the information my research partner and I discovered about their origins and early history at the US Copyright Office, where we reviewed all of the copyright registrations filed by James Port and Eddie Casio. This is my research partner, James Allais.
What we wanted to look into at the Copyright Office were basically the origins of the 12 quote-unquote Casio tracks. The 3 that were released on the Michael album, and the additional 9 tracks that we knew Sony had purchased from James Port and Eddie Casio. So we wanted to go to the Copyright Office to look into the history, according to the copyright record, of these 12 songs. And we knew some of these registrations had really interesting titles, like MJ Songbook 2009, registered June 27th, 2009, 2 days after Michael Jackson had died. We had no idea what the contents of MJ Songbook was, but we wanted to find out.
As we discussed at the beginning of episode 8, MJ Songbook is a collection of 10 songs which James Port and Eddie Casio copyrighted just 2 days after Michael Jackson's death, with credit attributed to the pop star.
So we were certainly interested in MJ Songbook. We also, for the sake of due diligence, thought it would be smart to look into basically all of their registrations from even before Michael Jackson had died. And we weren't sure that would be valuable. Like I said, we didn't know what was in these registrations, but we were making the trip out there. It was a big expense. If we were going to do it, might as well be as thorough as we can. And let's just gather everything James Port and Eddie Casio had registered at the Copyright Office. And I'm glad we did, because those registrations were very, very revealing. They tell us a lot. They tell us a lot about James Port as a songwriter, James Port just guiding his creative career. As we had already known, James Port had a budding R&B career under the pseudonym Bobby Ewing, and we uncovered a lot of his work for that project. And within those Bobby Ewing collections, we discovered several of these Casio tracks that were credited to Michael Jackson as a writer in 2009. In the same state they're in 2009, we see them copyrighted as early as 2003, not credited to Michael Jackson. We see them copyrighted in 2004, not credited to Michael Jackson. We see them copyrighted in 2005, not credited to Michael Jackson. And all the vocals on the 2009 copyright filings are James Port's vocals. We don't hear a single Michael Jackson vocal on those 2009 filings, even though Michael Jackson, according to the official James Port Eddie Casio narrative, Michael Jackson recorded these songs in 2007.
To refresh our memory regarding their origins, let's go back over each of the 10 songs in MJ Songbook. We'll start with the songs Black Widow, Monster, Water, and Breaking News, all of which make their first appearance in the copyright record as part of MJ Songbook in 2009, with credit to James Port, Eddie Casio, and Michael Jackson. While these 4 songs make their first appearance in MJ Songbook, one of those songs, Breaking News, is a derivative of an earlier song called Hot, which was registered by Port in 2008 and which was intended for a female artist, not for Michael Jackson. 2 additional songs, Keep Your Head Up and Need Your Love, can also be traced back to 2008 registrations on which only James Port is credited. Another song in MJ's songbook, Soulja Boy, can be traced back to a 2005 registration on which James Port and Eddie Casio are credited. And the song Switch can be traced back to a 2003 registration on which James Port, Eddie Casio, and Eddie's brother, Frank Casio, are credited. And while Frank was credited on Switch back in 2003, he wasn't credited as part of MJ's songbook on the 27th of June 2009, where the track was re-registered with credit to Michael Jackson. Aside from MJ's songbook, the other significant copyright registrations filed by James Port and Eddie Casio in the aftermath of Jackson's death are the ASON compilations, which were filed on the 18th of March 2010. Just 3 days after Jackson's estate and Sony Music announced their $250 million deal for up to 10 new projects, including a new album of Jackson's unreleased songs.
The King of Pop's estate has signed the biggest recording deal in history with Sony Music Entertainment. The first project will be an album of never-before-released recordings.
The appetite is definitely there for Michael Jackson. If we do release anything of unreleased material, it has to be fantastic and it can't.
So there's this moment in the Michael Jackson culture where everybody around Michael Jackson who had worked with Michael Jackson was bringing out their old box of tapes, so to speak. Here's what we got. And, it was very clear that the first posthumous album would be a very big enterprise. And there was a lot of media coverage about Michael's unreleased songs, and everybody's sort of revealing what they may or may not have, and it all gets coverage, and, it's all very, very exciting.
The King of Pop is said to have left behind a mountain of material.
There are hidden gems. There are hidden gems in these songs. So there could be a whole new life just from these songs alone.
So, I think James Port and Eddie Casio were very tempted by those stories to create their own version, their ultimate version of it, a secret album, a whole album. They were writing their version of that. And I think it's very clear that James Port and Eddie Casio had a very evolving track list for their secret Michael Jackson album. Because the track list of that album, according to the MJ Songbook in 2009, differs from the track list that they eventually sell to Sony and the estate in 2010. What James Port and Eddie Casio told the world in 2010 is that there were 12 Michael Jackson songs. Yet when you're registering your MJ Songbook in 2009, shortly after Michael Jackson had died, there were only 10 songs. And you would assume, since Michael Jackson is dead, that that track list can't change. So that's kind of interesting. So by the time we get to March of 2010, we see a more solidified story. A new narrative had developed. And you see artifacts for that new narrative in the Copyright Office, where in their registration, suddenly there's a new date of creation, 2007. So even though we see these songs in the Copyright Office record, 2003, 2005, 2008, 2009. Suddenly, they're registered in March 2010 with a claimed date of creation of 2007. 2 registrations, ASON compilation that comprised 13 songs. All 12 of the songs that would eventually be sold to Sony and the estate, plus 1 more.
The 12 songs from the ASON compilations, which were later sold to the estate and Sony, are Breaking News, Monster, Keep Your Head Up, Water, All Right, Black Widow, Ready to Win, Soulja Boy, Stay, Fall in Love, Burn Tonight, and All I Need. The 13th track from the ASON compilations, which was not sold to Sony and the estate, is Need Your Love. And as with all of their registrations, the vocals on all 13 tracks in the ASON compilations are sung by James Port. 9 of those tracks are registered under the title ASON Compilation 9 of 13, and those 9 tracks are credited to James Port, Eddie Casio, and Michael Jackson. The remaining 4 tracks are registered separately as Ace on compilation 4 of 13, and interestingly, those 4 tracks are credited only to Casio and Port. As we discussed in episode 8, the fact that Casio and Port have re-registered songs with changing authorship credits calls the authenticity of those credits into question. Take songs like Soulja Boy, Burn Tonight, All I Need, Ready to Win, Keep Your Head Up, and Need Your Love, for example. Between 2004 and 2008, while Michael Jackson was alive, all of those songs were registered in their completed form, without credit to Michael. But after Michael's death in 2009, those exact same songs were re-registered, but with credit to the pop star. So did Michael actually co-write the songs or not? Only one version of events can be true, so which is it? Did Eddie Casio and James Port deprive Michael of credit during his life? Or have they lied while giving him credit after his death? Either way, regardless of the answer to those questions, the fact remains that you're not supposed to register the same material more than once. And as we discussed in episode 8, the specialist that I spoke to at the Copyright Office told me that if you do register something more than once, the subsequent registrations would be invalid.
You can't re-register the same work twice. If it's the exact same work, then we shouldn't have waited a second registration for the same work. That's a no-no. If it does happen, then the second registration is invalid.
Just to be absolutely sure on this particular point, after producing episode 8, I called the Copyright Office again and spoke to yet another specialist who told me the exact same thing.
Correct. We wouldn't accept a duplicate registration. You should not register a work twice. The courts would look at the first registration as the valid registration.
Both specialists also told me that while they take registrations at face value, if they do detect any red flags, such as a duplicate registration, they will investigate.
Generally, it's taken on face value. And something has to draw our attention for us to question whether we have the correct copy of the work. And then if we need clarifications, we will reach out and get clarification. Then that will get us to address a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah, we have to take certain facts at face value. And, we may raise a question and then the person responds back. So we have a record of that conversation. What was the issue we raised? What was their response? The validity of the statements they make on their reply, we don't know who the copyright owner is. We don't know who the authors are. The applicants tell us who the authors and owners of the works are. We don't make that determination.
As we heard in episode 8, when I asked how Casio and Port might have gotten away with registering the same work more than once, but with conflicting authorship credits, the specialist told me that filling out a new application, but with a different title, would appear to be an entirely new work.
Now, if they fill out a different application with different information, that's something different.
And because Casio and Port's registrations are for collections of songs, not individual songs, the fact that some of the songs within the collections had previously been registered could have easily slipped through the cracks. We also heard in episode 8 that literally anyone can register a song and claim that Michael Jackson co-wrote it, regardless of whether or not that claim is true.
We have to take it at face value. If you say that you co-wrote a song with Michael Jackson, it's not for us to say whether or not you did or not. So if you upload a song that's not widely known, you say you and Michael Jackson did it, we will make the registration. So we take it at face value.
In my most recent conversation with the Copyright Office, I asked the specialist if the person filing a registration could face any kind of penalty if it were proven that they'd made untrue claims in the stated facts within their submission.
Well, yeah, on applications, they certify the applications under penalty of perjury. So yes, there can be a penalty for committing perjury against the government. So if they knowingly perjured themselves, then yeah, that could be an issue. It'd be an issue with the government. If they are defrauding the government, then that can raise the level of criminal, and the Department of Justice could then take action.
The specialist told me that in order for the Department of Justice to get involved, someone would first need to file a complaint with the FBI.
Intellectual property crimes are generally investigated by an arm of the FBI. So if somebody can file a complaint there, then it would be investigated on and then potentially sent to the Department of Justice if it needed federal prosecution. So if the courts find that somebody purposely defrauded, the courts could find them criminally liable.
But why would someone add someone else's name to a copyright registration as a co-writer if that person hadn't actually co-written the material in question?
Well, to give it value. If his name isn't on there, it doesn't have the value.
My co-researcher, James, reached the same conclusion.
So here's what's happening here in my observation is James Port registered these songs while Michael was alive, not attributing the songs to Michael Jackson whatsoever. Now Michael Jackson is dead, and all of a sudden, these songs are being attributed to Michael Jackson, the exact same songs. Now, why would someone want to do that? In 2009, 2010, there was probably no hotter property in the music business than a Michael Jackson song. And if you were going to tell a story surrounding these songs and trying to give them a deeper connection to Michael Jackson, one easy way to do that would be to claim that Michael Jackson was the co-writer. There'd be no other reason to attribute authorship to somebody else is to give up often royalties, and there's a bunch of reasons why you wouldn't want to do that. But in this particular case, these songs were much more valuable if we could say they were co-written by Michael Jackson. But the paper trail in the Copyright Office shows that there was a time where the songs were not at all attributed to Michael Jackson.
But even if the songs were co-written by Michael Jackson, what value would they actually have if at the time of Michael's death, he hadn't yet recorded them?
So back in the summer of 2009, in the aftermath of Michael Jackson's death, there were lots of ideas for what to do with Michael Jackson's unfinished stuff. One big unfinished project on Michael Jackson's radar was his This Is It tour.
We heard about This Is It in episode 7, when discussing how in the summer of 2009, Michael sold out 50 concerts for a comeback tour, but that he died just weeks before the tour was scheduled to begin.
AEG, the tour's promoter, had pitched the idea that other artists might do the show for him. So other big A-list artists would come on stage and do the This Is It show as a tribute to Michael Jackson.
We'd like to stage something in London and show the world Michael's last great work. It's his vision, his set list, his everything, his dance routines, this type of thing. And we'd like to show it to the world, and maybe with other artists, and maybe an eclectic mix, and the Jackson 5, Jackson 4. And we're sitting on the most valuable intellectual property, I think, in the world now. We have all that material. How we're going to exploit it and use it for our benefit slightly and the estate's benefit, we haven't really figured that out yet.
So it sounds to me like James and Eddie were maybe inspired by that idea because they too were shopping around this idea that other artists might complete the songs that they were working on for Michael Jackson.
The notion that James Port and Eddie Casio had considered having other artists record the Casio tracks was raised during an interview by an engineer that worked on the tracks, which we'll get to shortly.
But think about it. What artist would be interested in recording the songs that James Port and Eddie Casio wrote for Michael Jackson that maybe Michael Jackson was going to like enough to sing, no. If you're going to attract big name artists to record your Michael Jackson songs, they better be Michael Jackson songs. And the only way you can call them Michael Jackson songs is to make the argument that they were co-written by Michael Jackson. But I think it's very clear by the hard evidence in the paper trail that that is just an attribution given to these songs and not actual fact. There was a long history with these songs where they're identical and they are not at all attributed to Michael Jackson while Michael Jackson was alive. The exact same songs. So that right there, even without an impersonation, even without a fake vocalist, you still have a form of fraud.
The information we found in the copyright registrations certainly establishes a significant part of the provenance of the Casio tracks, and will continue to refer back to the registrations throughout the remainder of this series. But for now, let's discuss another part of the provenance, the testimony of those who worked on the Casio tracks during Michael's life. As we heard in episode 7, just a month before Michael's death, James Port sent 4 tracks to a Brooklyn-based mixing engineer named Angelo Montrone, asking Montrone to do new mixes of the tracks while telling him that they were for a Michael Jackson project. The fact that Montrone had worked on the tracks was public knowledge because Montrone had posted about it on his website in the aftermath of Michael's death. My research partner James explains.
You start to see artifacts, just authentic artifacts from that period in the weeks after Michael Jackson had died, like July 2009. And Montrone is posting on his website, that he's stunned to hear the news of Michael's death shortly after delivering the tracks that he would sing to. And throughout his testimony is just this understanding that Michael was going to record the tracks.
The testimony James is referring to comes from a 2014 interview he and I conducted with Montrone regarding Montrone's work on the tracks. James recalls.
We wanted to collect as much information as we could, and what we did know was that Montrone had stated online that he had worked on a handful of songs with James Port's voice. And the first thing we ask is, what songs did you work on? And we even asked him to pull up emails, and the 4 tracks that Montrone told us he worked on were Keep Your Head Up, Need Your Love, Ready to Win, and Water. So once we established what the 4 songs were, we asked him to verify with us who was singing on those songs. And indeed, he said it was only James Port singing on those songs. Only James Port.
During our interview, Montrone told us that he worked on the project for around 3 weeks, and that the first thing that he did was record new background vocals for some of the tracks with a female singer named Katia Cadet, before sending new mixes of the tracks back to James Port between the 3rd of June and the 17th of June, 2009.
And as of June 17th, 2009, there was no indication whatsoever that there was such a thing as 2007 Michael Jackson vocals. And likewise in the Copyright Office, you don't hear a single Michael Jackson vocal. No Michael Jackson vocals anywhere.
In fact, Montrone told us that the whole reason he had a job mixing the tracks was because Port wanted them to sound as good as possible so that he could present them to Michael, and that if Michael liked them, he may want to record them.
So how do you explain all that? How do you explain that such a critical person involved in the production of these songs would have no idea of Michael Jackson vocals? That it was always a future tense thing that Michael Jackson was going to be doing? So that's what makes Montrone's testimony so interesting.
Aside from the vocals, James and I asked Montrone if he had any other memories of his time working on the tracks.
Well, first of all, the first thing he tells us is that James never came to the studio, Montrone never met him, and his experience with James Port was very mysterious. And the people around him were asking him, are you sure this is legitimate? Are you sure that these people are actually involved with Michael Jackson? That basically he just has this guy telling him via email, it's a Michael Jackson project. You know what probably would have helped? Some Michael Jackson vocals. But he didn't hear Michael Jackson vocals, he heard James Port vocals. And he had James Port via email telling him it's for a Michael Jackson project. And that was it. That was it. Nothing else. Nothing else. And Montrone's impression was that this was a James Port project, which, to be honest, was a sort of similar impression I got from the copyright record.
Going into the interview with Montrone, James and I suspected that he'd been contacted by Port in the aftermath of Michael's death, because Montrone had made some changes to his website post about the tracks during that period. As we discussed earlier, Montrone first mentioned working on the tracks when he posted the following entry on his website in July of 2009.
We spent 2 weeks recording tracks and doing rough mixes for Michael Jackson. We were working with producer James Port, who had been co-writing with Michael for an upcoming album. We were stunned to hear the news of Michael's death, shortly after delivering the tracks that he would sing to.
But according to archived copies of Montrone's website, sometime between the 16th of October 2009 and the 26th of February 2010, Montrone changed that entry to the following.
We spent 2 weeks recording tracks and doing rough mixes for a great music talent, which, at this time, has to remain unknown. We were working with producer James Port for this upcoming album. This is a very exciting project, and we are thrilled to be a part of it. More to come on this.
So Montrone's July 2009 entry, which was initially about mixing tracks that Michael Jackson was going to sing, was changed to a great music talent who at this time has to remain unknown. During our interview, Montrone told us that it was James Port who asked him to remove Michael's name from the original post. But it was the reason that Port asked Montrone to remove Michael's name that made us raise our eyebrows. James recalls.
So in the months after Michael had died, James Port had told Montrone that they were trying to figure out what they're going to do with these songs, that they're going to maybe get someone else to sing on them, which is really interesting because allegedly Michael Jackson sang them in 2007. So why would you need to figure out who you're going to get to sing them?
Then, sometime after the 12th of September 2010, Montrone changed the entry back to its original wording about mixing tracks that Michael Jackson was going to sing, only this time adding Eddie Casio's name, who had not been mentioned in connection to the tracks in Montrone's original post.
And then the next thing he knows, basically half the world is saying the vocals on them are fake. And this guy knew the songs in 2009, and he knows that at least he didn't hear any Michael Jackson vocals.
During our interview, Montrone told us that in his opinion, James Port sounds a lot like Michael Jackson, which Montrone says could have been the reason that people were questioning the authenticity of the vocals in the first place, a comment that James and I found extremely odd. The reason we found Montrone's comment odd is because James and I have heard the versions of the tracks that Port sent to Montrone, and the vocals on those tracks sound absolutely nothing like Michael Jackson. As a reminder of what Port's voice sounds like, let's take another listen to his song Exotic Dancer, recorded for his failed Bobby Ewing project.
She ain't down with the 9 to 5. Little shorty wanna stay alive. Wanna get
that is the voice that Angelo Montrone was hearing when he mixed the James Port versions of the Casio tracks in the weeks before Michael's death. And it's also the voice that appears in a decade's worth of Port's copyright registrations.
Because of how surprising all of this was, to hear these 12 so-called Michael Jackson, quote-unquote, Casio tracks with different origins, with different intentions, on a different timetable with James Port's voice. We were so thrown back by what we found in the record that we decided to dig even deeper. So we were very thorough at the Copyright Office, and we documented the metadata, as much metadata as we could about those MP3 files. I think because we realized that the Copyright Office system or whatever maintains the original metadata, as it were, on James Port's computer when he would have uploaded them. So we were able to sort of see their date of creation. And just a couple days after our Copyright Office visit, we had our phone call with Montrone, and we got a better understanding as to what tracks Montrone had worked on.
As we heard earlier, the tracks Montrone worked on were Keep Your Head Up, Ready to Win, Need Your Love, and Water.
And as we just took in his testimony and we looked over the metadata that we had in our notes from the Copyright Office, we realized something about those timestamps, specifically as it relates to the MJ Songbook, the collection that was registered June 27th, 2009. So put yourself in James Port's computer chair. It's 2 days after Michael Jackson had died, and you decide, for whatever reason, to copyright the songs you were working on from Michael Jackson.
Thank you for submitting your registration with the
And the metadata reveals to us his frame of mind for his Michael Jackson songs. And we noticed that the Montrone songs, because they were the freshest, because they're the ones that they had just worked on, that Montrone had just delivered on June 17th, those 4 songs were the ones that were top of mind. They were the first 4 selected for this copyright registration. That's what the metadata showed. So it's interesting. It really is like we're archaeologists sort of digging through these artifacts. And then you start to piece together this story where you're really able to see these characters play out with some of the data points you've collected.
One of the data points we collected from the copyright filings was found in the registration for ASON compilation 4 of 13. Where a mixing engineer named Glenn Marchese was mentioned in the metadata for the song Monster. At the time of this discovery, we already knew that Marchese had worked on at least some of the Casio tracks, because he'd been credited as an engineer in the liner notes of the Michael album, not only on the song Monster, but also on Breaking News. But what we didn't know was when Marchese worked on the tracks, or whether the tracks that he worked on featured Michael's voice. And both of these questions were answered within the copyright filings. Firstly, the MP3 file for Monster, the one with Marchese's name on it, had a date of creation of October 19, 2008, 8 months before Michael's death, meaning that Marchese had worked on the track during Michael's life. And secondly, the track featured James Port's voice, not Michael Jackson's. As part of my investigation, I actually called Marchese to ask him about his work on the Casio tracks. And during that call, Marchese confirmed everything we had already established from the copyright filings. The following is an excerpt from that call.
After that, but I worked on stuff with the album when he died.
And that was with James Port and Eddie Casio?
Yes.
Did you work on it before or after he died, though?
Before.
Okay, so what was that collaborative session like? How did you get the call to work on that particular project?
I know James for years.
So did he give you the call to come in and work on the project as an engineer?
Yes.
Cool. And what was the nature of your work on that one? Were you doing mixing, or were you doing recording of vocals or music, or?
I was doing mixing.
Mixing. So what, James would bring you the recordings that he had already made and you would just do a mix down of everything basically in its completed form?
Yeah, we need them to sound better.
Okay. How long did you work on that project, if you can remember?
No more than a week, a few days.
Okay. Were you present for the recording of Michael's vocals?
I was not present in the recordings.
Do you know when he sang them? Did he sing them before or after you did the mixing on them?
After.
Okay. And do you know anything about those recording sessions?
Yeah, but I'm not going to talk about those.
Do you have any information to substantiate that he did sing them?
I have no proof. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm not trying to get involved in it. That's where I'll leave it.
All right, no worries.
As you just heard, Marchese revealed that it was James Port who invited him to work on the project. That when he did his mixes in 2008, Michael Jackson hadn't yet recorded the vocals, and that Marchese wasn't present for the recording of the vocals that Port and Casio claim are Michael's. Marchese also explained that his task was to make the 2008 pre-Michael versions sound better, and that he has no proof that Michael himself ever actually recorded them. Between the mixes that Glenn Marchese did in 2008 and the mixes that Angelo Montrone did in 2009, we can account for 5 of the 12 Casio tracks that were sold to the estate in 2010. Monster, Breaking News, Keep Your Head Up, Ready to Win, and Water. And in the case of those tracks, Marchese and Montrone confirmed what we found in the copyright filings, that at the time they worked on the tracks in 2008 and 2009, there were no Michael Jackson vocals on any of them. While we're on the subject of the tracks that Marchese and Montrone worked on, let's put some of those tracks under the microscope, starting with Water and Monster. But before we do that, it should be noted that in addition to the tracks that James Port and Eddie Casio sold to the estate in 2010, there are two other unreleased tracks called Water and Monster, which Michael Jackson worked on during his life, but which Casio and Port had nothing to do with.
So what's up with Water and Monster? How do we have two tracks called Water and two tracks called Monster? How do we have Casio versions and real MJ versions of these songs?
Let's start with Monster. What you just heard is the version of Monster that Casio and Port sold to the estate in 2010. But as we discussed in episode 4, Jackson had worked on a demo called Monster between 1998 and 2001 during the recording sessions for his Invincible album. Let's take a listen.
But that's not the same monster.
That's the voice of Jackson's longtime recording engineer, Michael Prince, who we've heard from in episodes 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Prince, who worked on the original demo for Monster, recalls that the only part of the song that Jackson recorded vocals for was the chorus.
Good chorus. Really good chorus. That's the only part Michael sang. He sang the chorus.
Prince also recalls that despite working on the track for around 3 years, from 1998 to 2001, he never heard Jackson mention it again after the Invincible album was released.
We stopped working on Monster in 2001. When the album came out and it wasn't going to be on the album, Michael never brought that song up again.
When asked whether he believed it was possible that James Port and Eddie Casio could have heard Jackson's original demo for Monster, Prince said,
Well, Frank definitely would have. Frank would have, I mean, Frank was there a lot. Frank was one of Michael's best friends.
The Frank Prince is referring to is Eddie's brother, Frank Casio, who worked as Jackson's personal assistant between 1999 and 2003.
And Frank was definitely aware and had heard Monster and any other thing we had worked on in the late 90s and the early 2000s.
It should be noted that in the book he wrote about his friendship with Jackson, Frank himself actually confirmed that he had access to the pop star's unreleased songs. In the book, called My Friend Michael, Frank says that he listened to Jackson's unreleased songs so much that he became able to play them on piano. Frank also says that Jackson was paranoid about people stealing his ideas, and that the only people Frank was allowed to play Jackson's unreleased songs for were his family, including his brother, Eddie. In fact, during a conversation with my co-researcher Jamin Bull, Eddie revealed that he had indeed heard Jackson's unreleased songs, including Jackson's incomplete demo for Monster. Also aware of the songs that Jackson and his team worked on in the late 90s and early 2000s was James Port. As we heard in episode 6, Port was working at the Hit Factory recording studio in New York City during the same period that Jackson's original concept for Monster was being developed.
James Port was a second or third engineer at the Hit Factory when we were working on Invincible.
As we also heard in episode 6, This was when Jackson introduced Port to Eddie Casio and encouraged them to start writing songs together. Eddie recalls,
Michael put us together as a team. He said, get with James and you guys start writing. And that's what we did. We started writing together.
And one of the songs they ended up writing was Monster. Another song which Eddie Casio and James Port also wrote for Jackson is Water. As we heard in previous episodes, shortly before the Casio tracks were sold to Jackson's estate, a reporter named Roger Friedman broke the news about the existence of the tracks in an article that he published via his website.
Bombshell exclusive. Michael Jackson recorded a whole new album of material in the fall of 2007.
In that article, Friedman revealed the titles of 3 Casio tracks, and Water was one of those tracks. What you just heard is the version of Water that Casio and Port sold to the estate in 2010 as an original Jackson recording. In his article, Friedman claimed that Jackson could be heard singing part of Water in the footage captured during rehearsals for the This Is It concert series. Let's take a listen to the audio of that footage. As you just heard, Jackson is singing the word water after concert director Kenny Ortega tells him to go and drink some water. And this has been touted by some as evidence that the Casio track called Water must be genuine. But as with the song Monster, a demo for a song called Water, completely unrelated to the Casio track, also exists. And as with the demo of Monster, the only part of Water that Jackson ever recorded is the chorus. Let's take a listen to Jackson's version. So was Jackson singing the Casio version of Water during the This Is It rehearsals, or his own version? Or was he singing someone else's version? Allow me to explain. Following Jackson's death on the 25th of June 2009, dozens of CDs were discovered in his bedroom. Among those CDs were new song ideas that other artists and producers had submitted for Jackson's consideration, plus several homemade compilations of classic songs from years gone by that Jackson loved and was inspired by, including this one. The song, called Cool Water, was originally written in 1936 by an artist named Bob Noland. The version that Jackson had on a CD in his bedroom, which is the version you just heard, is a 1955 cover by Frankie Lane. The fact that it was in Jackson's bedroom at the time of his death, during the period he was working on a demo for a song called Water, raises the question as to whether or not the Frankie Lane track may have been the inspiration for Jackson's version. It also raises the question as to whether Eddie Casio and James Port's song called Water was also inspired by the Frankie Lane track, or perhaps by Jackson's demo, as seems to have been the case with Monster. My research partner James gives his thoughts.
Eddie and James clearly knew titles and themes Michael wanted to write to. We see those artifacts, and they were trying to write what they thought Michael would want based on what he liked and what he'd done before and what they knew about him.
Which brings us to the provenance of Breaking News, a song about the media's obsession with Michael Jackson. which is written partially in the first person and partially in the third person, all from the perspective of Jackson.
So I think it's clear that James and Eddie were legitimately writing songs for Michael Jackson. We also know it's very well documented that Michael Jackson, during his final years, was obsessed with a song called My Prerogative by Bobby Brown. Michael loved it. And Michael Jackson's former bodyguards have gone on record to say that MJ would blast the song on repeat. And looking at its themes, you could absolutely see why. This is a song Michael could relate to.
According to Jackson's head of security, Bill Whitfield, who we heard from in episode 6, Jackson not only related to My Prerogative, but had also briefly considered the idea of recording a cover of the track during his final years, an idea which never came to fruition.
And good songwriters are supposed to write for their artists. And James and Eddie, I think, were doing that with Breaking News. Breaking News is clearly inspired by My Prerogative, side by side. The similarities are uncanny.
One of the similarities that James is referring to is the theme of each song.
Everybody wanting a piece of Michael Jackson. Everybody's talking all this stuff about me.
What you just heard is the first line of Breaking News as it was in 2010, when Eddie Casio and James Port sold it to Jackson's estate, and the first line of My Prerogative, sampled from Bobby Brown's 1988 album, Don't Be Cruel. As you heard, we have the lyric, Everybody Wanting a Piece of Michael Jackson, in Breaking News, and the lyric, Everybody Talking All This Stuff About Me, in My Prerogative, references to how the media refuses to mind its own business regarding the personal affairs of Jackson and Brown. In another example, Breaking News includes the lyric, They Say We're Crazy, while My Prerogative includes the lyric, They Say I'm Crazy. And again, in both lyrics, the antagonist is the media. Both songs also include repeated references to relationships, and in both songs the word strange is used to describe those relationships. There are even similarities in the melody, production, and arrangement of each track. For example, the phrasing of the melody in the opening line in each song is almost identical, which is also the case for the first two lines in each of the verses of Breaking News when compared with the phrasing of the choruses in My Prerogative. The bridges in each song also include similarities when it comes to their structure and melodic phrasing. The structure of each song after the bridge is also strikingly similar. The accents, the duration of the beat, and even the timing of the breakdowns in both songs all line up, almost to a T.
The similarities are uncanny. Side by side, they fit together almost to a formula. And I think with Breaking News, you're basically seeing a Michael Jackson version of My Prerogative written by James Port and Eddie Casio. Whether or not Michael Jackson was aware of it, we don't know. But they do reveal that Eddie and James were aware of some of Michael's musical tastes and that they were being attentive and diligent songwriters writing to them. But again, their claim is that MJ co-wrote the song, and their claim is that Michael Jackson sang on the song in late 2007. But there's no way Michael Jackson sang on this song. Maybe he was gonna sing on the song, but he died before he did. The only vocalist we hear on Breaking News as of the date MJ died is James Port himself. And the same thing goes for the other Casio tracks.
Which brings us to the next aspect of our provenance research. What happened with the Casio tracks after Michael died? By virtue of visiting the Copyright Office and gaining access to the James Port versions of the Casio tracks, my research partner and I developed an understanding of the state the tracks were in at the time of Michael's death. This allowed us to compare the Port versions with the quote-unquote Michael Jackson versions, which were later sold to the estate. And upon doing this, we made several noteworthy discoveries. While most of the tracks that were sold to the estate in 2010 as so-called Michael Jackson recordings were the same as the port versions but with different vocals, we noticed that other changes, aside from the vocals, had also been made to some of the tracks.
If the songs were recorded in 2007, as Eddie and James claim, how did the songs continue to evolve and change even well into 2010, many months after Michael Jackson died? Some of those songs, like Stay, All I Need, and Breaking News, appear to have been totally rewritten in the time since Michael Jackson had passed.
Let's discuss the changes to each of the songs James just mentioned, starting with Breaking News. As we heard earlier in this episode, and in episode 7, Breaking News is a derivative of another song called Hot, featuring provocative lyrics about a woman who was being pursued sexually by multiple men. And as we discovered in the copyright filing for MJ Songbook, by the time Jackson died in 2009, Hot had been rewritten as Breaking News. But interestingly, by the time of Jackson's death in 2009, Breaking News hadn't fully evolved into the version that was sold to the estate in 2010. In fact, the 2009 version of Breaking News in MJ Songbook, which is sung by James Port, still includes several lines of lyrics from Hot, which were ultimately replaced by new lyrics before Breaking News was sold to the estate as a so-called Michael Jackson track. Now let's discuss the changes to All I Need. At the time of Jackson's death in 2009, the James Port version of All I Need told the love story of a couple who lost track of time while laying naked together in bed. But a year later, when All I Need was sold to the estate as a so-called Michael Jackson recording, it had somehow transformed into a track about people coming together, giving second chances, and making things right. And finally, let's discuss the changes to Stay. At the time of Jackson's death in 2009, the James Port version told the story of a man who was trying to entice a bikini-clad woman to stay in a relationship with him by insisting that he could fulfill her erotic fantasies. But a year later, when Stay was sold to the estate as a so-called Michael Jackson track, all mention of bikinis and erotic fantasies had been replaced by more family-friendly lyrics.
But again, if the songs were written and recorded in 2007 and the guy died in 2009, how did the songs keep on changing? If Michael Jackson is dead, how did he sing revised lyrics? It doesn't make sense.
While it's clear from their themes that some of the Casio tracks, like Breaking News, really were being written for Michael Jackson during the pop star's life, it also seems as though others, like All I Need and Stay, were not. Aside from the hypersexual lyrics that the tracks had at the time of Jackson's death, another piece of evidence suggesting that All I Need and Stay weren't intended for Jackson is the fact that while both songs were sold to his estate in 2010, neither song was included in MJ Songbook, the copyright registration filed by James Port just 2 days after Jackson's death, on the 27th of June 2009. 2 additional tracks, which were also sold to the estate in 2010, but which were also not included in MJ Songbook in the aftermath of Jackson's death, are Fall in Love and Burn Tonight.
And so you'd assume that if certain songs really were being written for Michael Jackson during Michael's life, or if Michael had actually recorded them, as Eddie and James claim, those particular songs would have been included in MJ Songbook 2 days after his death. But they were not.
Throughout this episode so far, we've taken a detailed look at the provenance of the Casio tracks. we've heard insights from those who worked on the tracks during Jackson's life. We've heard about how the tracks evolved over the years, from changing themes to rewritten lyrics. And we've meticulously inspected the copyright registrations filed by James Port and Eddie Casio, piecing together previously unknown parts of the narrative based on the paper trail they left behind. To conclude this episode, we're going to take a look at the paper trail that Michael Jackson left behind at the time of his death, to find out whether the Casio tracks appear anywhere in Michael's own plans for his new music.
There's no doubt that in the days before he passed, Michael Jackson was very actively thinking about his new album. Literally, scattered throughout the very bedroom he died in, he left behind notes, CDs, lists of song titles, all of which show how actively he was thinking about his new music. Over these many countless notes and lists, you can account for 45 different songs that Michael Jackson was considering for his new album. Of those 45 titles, not one James Port Eddie Casio track is named. We see Michael Jackson's handwriting, naming track after track. You see some of the same titles over and over again on these lists. He clearly had favorites. But the James Port Eddie Casio songs were nowhere to be seen in these notes.
Among those handwritten notes are titles for tracks dating back years, and in some cases decades prior to Jackson's death. Those titles include The Way You Love Me and Hollywood Tonight, which date back to the late 1990s, Hold My Hand, the duet Jackson recorded with R&B star Akon in late 2007, and Best of Joy, a track which dates all the way back to the early 1980s, but which Jackson was still working on in the final months of his life. The four titles I just mentioned, The Way You Love Me, Hollywood Tonight, Hold My Hand, and Best of Joy, are listed by Jackson in his notes more times than any other titles, and all four songs were included on the Michael album in December of 2010. Among the other titles mentioned in Jackson's notes are 3 tracks with fully completed vocals, all of which date back to the 1980s. A dozen rough demos from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, all of which have incomplete vocals, and countless instrumental tracks with no vocals at all, which Jackson was working on during his final years. While most of the titles in Jackson's notes were songs that he himself had written, there were at least 2 titles which were written by others, and which Jackson had planned to record. One of those titles is Shut Up and Dance, a track written by studio engineers Michael Prince and Eric Kirkland, on which Kirkland sings the vocal. The other title is I Love You, a track written by Michael's nephew, Tarrell Jackson, which Tarrell and his brothers recorded for a 3T album which was never released. But despite the fact that James Port and Eddie Casio had been actively writing for Jackson during his final years, there is absolutely no mention of any of their tracks among the 45 titles we uncovered in the Popstars handwritten notes.
45 song titles, not one of them are the so-called Casio tracks. Not one. Now it is clear these guys were writing from Michael Jackson while he was alive. The question is, to what degree was Michael Jackson involved? And to what degree was Michael Jackson even aware? We've poured through everything we could. We dug and dug, trying to find any evidence that might prove that Michael Jackson even knew about these songs. Like I said, their songs weren't named in any of his notes. But we did actually find something. In addition to those many notes, also in Michael Jackson's bedroom were dozens upon dozens of CDs, many of which have Michael Jackson's handwriting on them.
Among those dozens of CDs were work-in-progress copies of some of the titles mentioned in Jackson's handwritten notes, along with ideas that other writers had submitted to Jackson in the hopes that he might like them and want to record them.
And among those CDs are 2 discs, and written on those discs, not in Michael Jackson's handwriting, are the titles All Right and Ready to Win. Those are 2 of the Casio tracks. In fact, these are the only 2 Casio tracks we are able to directly connect to having been in Michael Jackson's presence. And I think as an artifact, that's very interesting because they line up directly with a copyright registration from March 2008. That registration is called JPEC Collection. It's the very last copyright registration made while Michael Jackson was alive, and it contains just 2 songs, All Right and Ready to Win, the same songs on those CDs.
As we heard in episode 7, JPEC stands for James Port, Eddie Casio, and both men are credited on the registration, which was filed with the US Copyright Office on the 30th of March, 2008. As James mentioned, the only songs in JPEC Collection are All Right and Ready to Win, the same 2 Casio track titles found on CDs in Jackson's bedroom in the aftermath of his death. Accompanying the audio files in JPEC Collection are typed lyric sheets for both All Right and Ready to Win. And at the bottom of the lyric sheet for Ready to Win, there's a notation which says, Copyright 2008, James Port and Eddie Casio. But despite the fact that All Right and Ready to Win were found on CDs in his bedroom shortly following his death, one person not mentioned in the lyric sheets or anywhere in the copyright filing is Michael Jackson.
Now, I haven't had the opportunity to listen to those CDs, but I have heard the JPEC Collection, and it's James Port singing on those 2 songs as of March 2008, not Michael Jackson.
It's also worth remembering, as we heard earlier in this episode, and in episodes 7 and 8, that one of those 2 songs, Ready to Win, was among the 4 tracks that a Brooklyn-based engineer named Angelo Montrone worked on in the final weeks of Jackson's life, and that even as late as the 17th of June 2009, just a week before Jackson's death, the tracks still had James Port's voice on them.
James Port and Eddie Casio would later claim that there were complete Michael Jackson vocals recorded in 2007. Why did Montrone never hear them in June 2009? According to Montrone, he was told by James Port that Michael Jackson was going to record the vocals. That was the state of the vocals as of June 17th, 2009, according to Montrone. And I've also heard those songs on MJ's songbook as of Michael Jackson's death. Again, James Port singing. You don't hear a single Michael Jackson vocal, no Michael Jackson vocals anywhere. None of this seems right at all. All we know for sure is that at the time of Michael's death in 2009, the songs had James Port's voice on them, not Michael Jackson's voice. But somehow, by the time they were sold to the estate in 2010, they had someone else's voice on them, a so-called Michael Jackson vocal. This is consistent of all 12 Casio tracks. So, very, very fascinating and very, very damning, I would say, to a lot of the claims that James Port and Eddie Casio would make.
In the next episode of Faking Michael, we'll hear the expert opinion of several connoisseurs on both Michael Jackson and the Casio tracks.
The second I heard breaking news on November 8th, 2010, I believed I was hearing Jason Malachi. I knew Jason Malachi.
After 2010, after the release of the Michael album, there was no shortage of fans reaching out to this guy.
It got really crazy. Like, we were getting like death threats, people calling the house.
Who are you asking for?
I'm looking for a Jason Capetta.
Oh, there's no one there by that name here.
I'm approaching him saying, hey bro, everybody online is saying you're connected to one of the biggest frauds in music history. What do you think about that?
Like, he really could have just shut the conversation down very quickly by saying, I'm not singing on those songs. You might have to look somewhere else.
He's never once denied it. He's only avoided the questions and then called those questions threats.
Hello? Who's this?
My name is James. I'm looking for Mr. Casio, Eddie Casio.
No, you don't have the right number. This is asshole.
I mean, the Casios, when they first announced they had this album, they basically came in and swept up some cash and ruined their reputation.
And I felt a responsibility to immediately say, you know what? I've studied this man's voice my entire life. This is not Michael Jackson.
Faking Michael is a production of Oath Media, which is researched, written and narrated by me, Damien Shields. Original score, sound design and mixing by Dan Villalobos. Additional research by James Allais and Jamin Bull, and the teams at the MJ Cast and A Truth Untold. Artwork by Stephen Ward. If you enjoy the Faking Michael podcast, please consider rating, reviewing and sharing it. Faking Michael is an independent piece of investigative reporting. All source material is used in a limited and transformative way for the purposes of commentary, criticism, demonstration and education in accordance with fair use guidelines. Some of that material has been edited for clarity and time. If you'd like to contact the makers of this podcast, support our cause, or order a copy of the Faking Michael book, please visit our website at fakingmichael.com.